The Walking Dead Rewrite, Season 8, Episode 15, Call to Arms.
Oh my god, hi!
Now this episode would begin and you'd have Gabriel repeating, "May God have mercy on us all," as he's standing on the water tower. Now as we would see Beta, as he is walking with the Horde, as he is saying, "We march, we take, we kill," and you would see him doing his normal whisper march, as you would see a lot of the whispers standing by his side as he's leading the Horde to the sanctuary. Now Gabriel would see this and be very panicked, as we then have Gabriel that then stands there with his rifle and picks off a few whispers that he sees in the crowd. Beta would then see this from far and he would see that some of his men are getting picked off. As he would look kind of angry, he'd pull out his knives as Gabriel runs out of ammo. He then sees that they're heading towards the sanctuary and he then realizes he has to pack it in. He then starts going down the ladder of the water tower trying to get to the bottom, but then as he gets a few inches away from actually stepping on the ground, a whisper sees him and throws a knife and hits him in the leg, as Gabriel then screams out and falls off the tower. As we then see Gabriel on the ground, we then see multiple whispers are standing in front of Gabriel. As they stand over him and they all pull out knives, Gabriel stands there as he is ready to die. Gabriel sits there. He closes his eyes, accepting his fate. But then Morgan comes in out of nowhere with his axe and kills every single one of these whispers like they're nothing. Morgan then looks at him and says, "Hey man, you alright?" Gabriel says, "I am now, thanks to you." Morgan would pick him up and he would say, "What the hell's going on? I saw you leave for the sanctuary, figured I could help." Gabriel says, "Well, I'm glad you did. Although this place, Morgan, I don't know if it's gonna last." Morgan says, "Then let's make sure it does." He grabs Gabriel as they then run for the sanctuary. As they arrive at the entrance, as they then get in. As we then see the walkers are heading towards sanctuary, Morgan and Gabriel then go inside for safety. As we then see everybody, all the workers on the outside of the sanctuary have to pack it in for their safety. As everybody runs inside, you then have Dwight and you have Sherry that run out to the rooftop of the sanctuary. As they see this Horde coming, as Sherry says, "D, what the hell are we gonna do?" Dwight sees Beta in the crowd as he stares him down from the rooftop and says, "We're gonna do one thing and one thing only. Honey, we're gonna fucking light him up." Now, after the intro, we would have Princess, as she stands there and says, "Yo, what's up?" And Daryl would just kind of look at her and he would say, "Who the hell are you? The hell do you want?" And she would say, "Excuse me? You guys are the ones making a racket. I thought you needed help. But now you're acting like I'm the one causing a problem here? Damn, I haven't seen someone in over a year. And the first ones I find seem like a bunch of meanies." And Yumiko would say, "I'm sorry, you just caught us off guard, okay? We didn't know that you were around." And she would say, "Seriously? If I wanted to attack, I would hold the gun like this. But the other way, that's for hello." And Daryl would say, "All right, no, come on, we're done." And Rosita would say, "Hang on, hang on, hang on. I mean, she doesn't seem to be hurting anybody. She clearly seems friendly." Princess would say, "Very friendly." Daryl would say, "Yeah, nah, ain't gonna work for us. All right, we got enough people on our own. We don't need anybody else joining. And I don't know what kind of pink outfit she's wearing, but it's really not my style." And Rosita would say, "Really? Because we could use her." Magnus says, "Yeah, she seems fine." Yumiko would say, "Yeah, but Daryl's got a point. I mean, we don't really know her." And Daryl would say, "Look, we got enough responsibilities right now anyway. We could be walking into a trap. Hell, for all we know, we're bringing the trap with us." And he would point towards Princess, and Princess would say, "You guys really seem like you're having a private conversation over there. Look, I'm not here to attack you." Daryl would say, "How are we supposed to know that? I mean, you set walkers up all across the city. Doesn't seem so welcoming to me." Princess would say, "Oh, come on. Have you ever seen a setup like that before?" Daryl would say, "Never, actually. That's part of my motivation right now." And Princess would say, "Hey, look, I can be helpful, okay? Just give me one chance. All right, one chance to show you that I can be useful and helpful to whatever it is you guys are all doing. Listen, ask me a few questions. What's the capital of Pennsylvania?" Eugene would say, "Harrisburg." And she'd be like, "Did I know that? I think I did know that. Maybe I'm hallucinating. Man, if I am, this is wild." And she would then make the proposition to them, well, at least let me show you the best way through the city. And you'd have Yumiko like, no, I don't think so. And she's like, oh, come on, why not? And she's like, well, because we don't know you. And she's like, of course you do, princess. I'm great, you'll see. We see some walkers coming up, and then obviously, just like in the show, she'd be like, hey, look, watch how helpful I can be. And she shoots the walkers, but unfortunately, she scares the horses, and they all look pissed off, Daryl in particular. And she's like, damn, sorry about that. Now, we would then cut to Alexandria as we see all of the residents of the hilltop after the fire, like Glenn, his son, the rest of the members, of course, are all back at Alexandria with Rick and the crew. Now, as you would see Rick, and he would be looking at a map of the general area, you'd have a lot of the council members with him, Michonne, and some of the others, and you would even see Negan hanging out back there with his arms crossed, and Rick would then say, all right, this is what we do. All right, tomorrow we finish this. We go out there. Beta and the rest, they're still around. All right, Negan, he took care of Alpha. All right, now we're all going to be grateful for that, no matter what you think. And Negan would just kind of sit there with a smirk on his face, and he would say, hey, I ain't looking for a damn thank you, but you're welcome. And Rick would kind of just give him a look, and Rick would say, all right, tomorrow, here's the plan. We ambush, all right? We take out the rest of the horde, all right? We're going to take our best fighters. We're going to go. And Negan just cuts him off, and he would say, all due respect, Grimes, I have a bit of an idea if you're willing to hear it. And Michonne and some of the others and Glenn kind of all look at each other, and Rick's just like, all right, say your piece. And that would be a big deal, because Rick would look at Negan and be like, hey, man, like, you do you, you know? And Negan would then look at him, and he would say, it's a fine plan. But if we're looking at this realistically, those jackasses, bunch of dickholes, are going to be coming after us. So here's what I'm proposing, Grimes. Tomorrow, we set out a crew, like you said, but we set a distraction. We make Beta think that that is exactly where we're going to be. We set explosives. We set different things there. And then while they're distracted and he leads his horde straight down that direction, we blow him up. Hit him by surprise. Come up behind him. Make them think that that's exactly where we'll be. Set them in a trap, execute the horde, Beta inside, we're done. Rick would look at Negan, he would say, are you sure this is gonna work? And Negan would say, come on, Grimes. After all this time, you really don't trust me? Rick would then look at him and he would say, yeah, we're not quite there yet, but we'll do it. And he looks at the crew. Everybody looks surprised, and Rick's like, we'll do it. That's the plan. Set a distraction, set this all in motion. Tomorrow, we attack. For tonight, let's recuperate and make sure our walls are heavily guarded. I want 10 guards all around all areas of this place, just in case Beta decides to come up and try something. All right? And the council agrees. And then Michonne would then throw in, make sure everybody gets a good night's rest. Tomorrow's the end of this. Rick would look at the crew, and Negan would kind of have a smirk, and Rick would just say, I hope this works. That's my family on the line right there. And Negan would say, well, we've done this much so far. I think we can handle one more push. Rick would then say, a push. And Negan would say, yeah, you know, just something to tickle their dicks a little bit more. Rick would then look at him and he would say, you're insane. And Negan would say, never denied it. As we would see them walk away together. We then would cut to outside the sanctuary as we see Beta marching with his whispers. As he would see the sanctuary coming up in front, as he would then say to two of his whispers next to him, fan out, march, kill, and don't take back. End this for Alpha. As we would see them continue to move, as we would zoom out from Beta, as you would then see Dwight, Sherry, Morgan, and some of the other Savior member fighters behind them on the top of the roof of the sanctuary. They would be looking down at this. Dwight would look very on edge, and Sherry would say, blow them up, and Dwight would say, yeah, there's one shot of saving this place, if we even have a shot at all. They would then stand there, and Morgan would say, what are you suggesting? And then Dwight would then say, look, back before we met you folks, you blew up a lot of us out on the road. You remember that shit with the explosives, the RPG? Morgan would say, yeah, I heard that story. I was caught back in the herd when that happened. Dwight would say, yeah, but when we came for our first offering, we took what you had. We took the explosives, we took the rocket launchers. We never had a use for them. Negan just felt that taking it would show people how much power he had. He didn't have any use for it, he already had a bunch of shit. This is the one time we need it, more than ever. We need to get the same RPGs that we took from Rick's crew back in the day. We're going to use them. We're going to use them to defend the walls, all right? We're going to take out as many as we can from the front. We need to make a path. We need to make a clearing so that the families and the innocent people that are involved can get the hell out of here even if this place falls. And if we save this place, then I guess we'll just call that a victory. Sherry would then look at him and she would say, okay, I'll round up some soldiers. Dwight would then say, okay, Morgan, you all right to hold down the fort? Dwight would then look down with some binoculars. As he would see some whispers in the crowd, Morgan would then look behind him and he would say, they're in there. Dwight would then look at Morgan and he would say, yeah, they are. Not for long. It's this place or them. Let's try. As we see them walk back inside, as we see Dwight has a game plan. Now we would then see Daryl and the others as they are sitting there discussing the way to go next. As we then have Daryl that kind of speaks a little bit of trash about the idea of taking Princess with them. And you would have Yumiko and Magna that are actually saying like, yeah, it's honestly not a bad idea. And Eugene would say, well, the way I look at it, we need as many people as we can get around here. Apologies, Daryl. My vote's with them. Rosita would then be the final one to then say, you know, honestly, I think we could use the manpower. Daryl would look kind of frustrated and he would say, we don't even know this woman. I mean, she could turn on us at any time. And I think that's realistic from Daryl. Daryl wouldn't just fall into, oh, let's trust a new stranger. So Daryl would be kind of on the fence about it. He wouldn't really want to take Princess with them. Rosita would be with the rest of them though, and Eugene would agree. They're going to take Princess with them. So as they call them over, I would keep the same thing. You'd have Princess that, of course, would then be called over. She'd be like, oh, what? You talking to me? You know what I mean? And she would then walk over and she'd be like, thank you so much. Like, I promise I won't be a pest. And you'd then have Daryl that would instantly say, you'd be like, so you mentioned you had access to some transportation. And she would say, of course, ton of them in a garage full. I'll take you there. And then you'd have a moment where Rosita, because I think Rosita would be the one that would do this in this scene. She'd be like, okay, one condition. You want us to follow you, you hand over your gun. And Princess would be like, I really want to spend time with living people again, but I'm not sure I trust you either. I mean, I'm outnumbered. I could probably take out one of you, two if I'm lucky, but then there would still be somebody else here to take me out. So it's a little tough, see? And then they kind of just stand there and she'd be like, fine, you can have it. I know where to find more guns anyway. Daryl would then look at her and he would say, all right, we have a route. Let's go. As we would see, this princess woman looks all excited that she's coming with them. Now we would then cut back to Alexandria and you would have Lydia that kind of just is sitting in this room kind of all her own, and you would see Judith and she would walk into the room. Now this I would keep from the show because I do like this scene where you have Judith that kind of walks up on her and they kind of talk about like, yeah, like how do you feel after what happened to your mother? And Lydia would kind of just say like, look, not everybody gets to have a mom like yours. And that's all right. And I would add this piece of dialogue in it as well too, is you would have Carl that would kind of walk up and he would ask Lydia if she's all right. And Lydia would say, yeah, I'm fine. And Carl would say, Judith, you mind giving us a minute? And Judith would kind of walk away. And you'd have Carl that would walk up to her. He would actually hold her tight and he would say, listen, I had no part in anything of what happened to you. And she would kind of cut him off and she would say, look, you don't have to apologize. I know. I spent so much time wanting her dead. I spent all this time hoping that it would happen, hoping that at some point something would happen, and now that it's happened, and she would kind of start breaking down, and she would say, I guess I have more of a heart than I thought I did. And Carl would say, it's all right. We all have a heart in some way, shape, or form. Might be buried deep, might be out in the open. Everybody has one. And Lydia would say, I know. Yours is definitely down deep. And Carl would say, is not. I show my feelings for everybody. And Lydia would say, look, I don't know what I'm going to do. And Carl would say, you're going to stay with us is what you're going to do. All right, you earned your place here. Your mother is not going to defy what happens to you. That's what she would want. And Carl would say, and forget what your mother thinks. Forget what your mother thought about these communities. These communities will last. We're going to make them last. Even if I have to kill every last goddamn one of those whispers, I will. Lydia would say, you would do all that for me? Carl would say, yeah, I don't know if I told you this or not, but I had to put down my own mother. So I do know what it's like to lose a parent, and I do know what it's like to feel like you're responsible for everything that happened. You're not. You're one of us. And she would hug Carl. As you would see Judith seize them hug from a distance, and Judith would look happy that Lydia seems to be okay. As we then see Carl, and he would then be walking in, as he checks on little baby Herschel, and he would say, hey Herschel, you all right? And Herschel would say, yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for letting me stay over. And Carl would say, it's no problem. Me and my dad are pretty welcoming, as you can see. And Glenn would say, well, thanks. We didn't really have a place to stay. I do appreciate the hospitality. And Carl would say, no problem, stay as long as you want. Glenn would then look at Carl and he would say, can I ask you a question? And Carl would say, yeah, go ahead. Glenn would say, does it get easier? Carl would say, if you're talking about death, no, it does not. I think about it all the time. Glenn would say, I'm trying to hope that maybe this is what Maggie would want. Be protecting my boy in this place. I already feel like I let her down by letting Hilltop burn the way he did. And Carl would say, that wasn't your fault. And Glenn would say, maybe it was. Maybe if I tried more, maybe if I did more, maybe things would turn out different. Maybe everything that happened with Nicholas, I almost died then. What happened if I did? What happened if Maggie was on those pikes and I let Nicholas kill me back then in the herd? My son would be an orphan. Carl would say, you can't think that way. Glenn would say, I've tried to be positive. I've tried to be optimistic for all these years, thinking that everything's going to work out. But I mean, look at this. Carl would say, yeah, look at this. Glenn, you're one of the most hopeful people I've ever met. You can't let what's happened drag you down. Now that is something Maggie wouldn't want. Maggie would not want you to give up. Maggie would want you strong and believing in something good. Glenn would then look at Carl and he would say, the only thing that I have left, the only thing that I can do is make sure that my son can survive, that my son outlives me. Carl would then look at him and he would say, and that's going to happen because we're going to make sure of it. And Glenn would say, I hope so. If anything happens to him, I don't know what I would do. And Carl would say, we're going to be all right. After tomorrow, this will all be behind us. Glenn would then look at him and he would say, for my son. Carl would say, yeah, for your son. We would then cut to Beta outside of the sanctuary, as you would then see him, and he's standing behind a tree with a few of the other Whisperers with double-barrel shotguns in their hands. And Beta would look at them and he would say, you know the plan. You know what to do. And you would have one of them that would say, the pack believes in your wisdom. Following the Alpha. Beta would pull a knife and all the other Whisperers would just stand there looking nervous. Beta would pull a knife on this woman, just like in the TV show, and she would say, apologies, Beta, we see her within you, all right? And then we would then hear an explosion from in front of the sanctuary. Beta would look back, distracted by this, and he would say, we can't wait, we walk. As we then see them blend into the horde, as we then see Dwight, Gabriel, Morgan, Sherry, and some of the other fighters on the top of the sanctuary firing rockets down on the herd and blowing them up. As we see a bunch of walkers heading towards the entrance of the sanctuary, they are leaning over the fence as we see the fence starts to go down. We would then see them break down the fence as the walkers would then start pouring in front of the sanctuary. We would then see Dwight, he would say, come on, come on, come on. We would then see them firing their guns down as much as they can down to the walkers. Dwight would say, there's too many. And then Morgan would say, come on, we got him, we got him. Sherry would look at Dwight and she would say, D, it's not gonna work. And Dwight would say, it will work, it's the only way it can work. They keep firing the explosives down and Dwight just looks ahead and he sees that they are barely even making a dent. And Dwight would look overwhelmed and he would say, fall back, fall back. And they would have no other choice. Even though they tried, I would keep it realistic. They would get a decent fracture of the horde at the front, but the explosives are not enough. The horde is too big. And as soon as Dwight and the others decide to pack it in, Beta would see them from the very bottom of the horde. As he would see Dwight and the others run inside of the sanctuary, Beta would see them run in like that, and he'd have a massive smirk on his face, looking happy that in his mind, it looks like he's gonna take this place for himself. Now, another scene that we would definitely keep in this version is the sequence where you have Negan, he'd be like cooking some dinner and stuff like that, and you would see Lydia, and she would walk up to Negan and she would say, did it feel good? And Negan would say, what? And he would be like, is this about your mom? She'd be like, damn right, it's about my mom. You don't get to tell me what I'm supposed to feel. And Negan would say, look, I know you're feeling upset, all right? I'm not gonna apologize for anything. I'm not gonna act like I liked her because I didn't. But I understand what it's like, kid. I've lost people I care about too, and I'm sorry. I am so sorry I took you away from her. And she would say, don't do that. And Negan would say, look, I never intended to hurt you. And Lydia would say, you don't get to tell me how I'm supposed to feel, all right? You can't tell me what you think of her, okay? Because I hated her, okay? I hated her too. Probably more than anybody here could have ever hated her, all right? So screw you for taking that chance away from me. And Negan would say, it's okay, kid. And she would say, no, it's not okay. And she would, do the breakdown from the show. Obviously, some tweaked dialogue here and there, but that scene would still go down. I like the scene. I think it's good for these two to kind of, hash it out, because Negan did kill her mother still, and we do have to remember that. But you would have that hug scene that would go down, just a little different. And I'm sure you may notice the other thing that we took out of this scene, Negan would not say that he likes Alpha. He would not say that he cared about Alpha and that he wishes that he never did what he did. No, not Negan dialogue at all. That is not anything of what the guy would say. And he would straight up be real, like Negan is, and he would say, look, I'm not gonna act like I liked her, but I'm also not gonna say that, it's obviously, something simple. It is tough, and it is tough for someone like her to go through something like that, and that is something I would definitely show in this sequence. Now, we would then cut to outside of the Alexandria walls, as we would see Rick, and he's out on patrol, as we see him radioing Dwight and the Sanctuary, and he says, all right, we got everybody back. Are you guys doing okay back there? And we would hear nothing, and Rick would look slightly concerned. But then we would see a walker approach, and then out of nowhere, Judith would kill it. Now, obviously, the difference is in this version, it's not Daryl. She is with her father, which I think is way more enjoyable. But she would say, like, hey, what's going on? And he's like, hey, Judith, who are you with? And she's like, no one. And it's like, man, really? And Rick's like, all right, look, I'm taking you back. She's like, please, can I not go back? I hate it there. It's just depressing. Everybody's upset. Everybody's all bent up about what happened. I just can't take it anymore. Can I please stay out with you, Dad? And Rick would say, all right, fine. I get it. Things can get pretty depressing out there. But if you're going to stick with me, you're going to do everything I say, all right? You understand that? And Judith would say, yeah, of course. And Rick would then say, all right, look, this is what I do out here. I walk the perimeter, all right? If I find something, I go straight back, I radio it in, all right? Now you're going to stay by me, you're going to do everything I say, got it? And she's like, yep, I swear, Dad, I won't do anything. And he's like, okay. Now he takes her, and this I think would be just a little bit more enjoyable, because obviously in the original series it was Daryl by default, but obviously we have Rick in this version, so I think it'd be nice to have father-daughter going out there doing their thing. So I would definitely do that in this version. Now, after that, we would then cut to Princess's crew, and they would open up the garage door, and you would have Daryl that would say, wheels? Really? And you would see all these bikes, and I would keep this the exact same. It would be a moment where they'd be like, really? That's it? And Daryl would look at Princess, he'd be like, really? Got no damn bikes? Just this shit? And Princess would be like, well, what? I did say wheels. And then you'd have Rosita that would say, well, technically she did say wheels. And then Daryl would kind of roll his eyes and he'd say, all right, we don't have time for this shit. And then you'd have Magna that would kind of address the elephant in the room, and she would say, all right, well, who's going with who? And you'd have Daryl be like, we taking her? And Eugene would say, well, I mean, she could be a help on a metaphorical trip. I mean, you never know what kind of shenanigans we could run into out there. And Daryl would be like, fine. But if anything happens, it's on you, all right? I don't want to be responsible if this woman leads us into a trap. And Princess would say, I'm not leading you anywhere. I led you to Wheels, which showed up. I mean, look, I'm sorry, all right? If I'm causing too much of a problem, maybe I should just stay back, all right? Just stay alone like I've been for years. All right, I've talked to the wall. I've talked to a lot of other things. All right, I've talked to the dead out there. That's how bored I've gotten, okay? I understand if you don't want me to come with you, okay? I just figured I would help. I just wanted to show you the garage, okay? And then you'd say, Princess, you're amazing. You want to stay and be friends. But I clearly see that I've screwed that up for you, so I'm sorry. And you would see them kind of feel bad. And even Daryl would kind of look almost like he regrets some of the words he said. And she'd be like, look, when I was first here by myself, all right, I thought nobody would came. And then, of course, all odds are it was so empty. And then next thing you know, I'm all alone for years and nobody's around, okay? And you'd have Eugene that would kind of pipe in. He'd say, I do have a bit of a sense of how you feel. And he would kind of look at her and he would say, look, I made poor decisions. I lied to folks, all right? The inevitable is being left alone. And Eugene would look at Daryl and he would say, I want to take her. And Magna and Yumiko would back him up. And even Rosita would kind of give Daryl a look, and Daryl would say, fine, all right, you can come with us. And she'd be like, really? Really? I can? And Daryl's like, yeah, just try not to get in our way. And she would say, Well, okay, do we know where we're going? Is there a map? Do I get to hold it? And everybody would just look annoyed. And you would see Daryl kind of has a nice change of heart, and he decides, okay, we're going to let the princess come with us, which I think is a very good thing. So obviously in this, I think it's a really cool thing to see, but at the same time, I'm sure you guys have noticed, we have skipped all of the landmine scenes and all that filler. I don't like filler in this. I think that was a terrible amount of filler in the original series. I don't think you need it, truly, because you can do a scene just like this where you show how Princess is, you know, feeling alone, and you get the bikes and the scene progresses. I just think it flows so much better this way, and I think that is a perfect way to bring Princess along on the journey while also still showing the non-trusting side of Daryl. So I think that all works out very, very well, and I think that is exactly how the show should have done it, and that's how we're going to do it in this. Now back with Rick and Judith. Now just like in the TV show, you would have them there doing their patrol, and then obviously just like in the series, we would see a Whisper approach them in a crowd of walkers. They would take them out, and then obviously the final one would kind of stand out, pull a knife on them, and you'd have Rick, he would throw a knife towards this Whisper. The Whisper would then fall down the hill, and Rick would take out his Colt Python, tell Judith to get behind him as Judith holds her sword, and he would say, drop the knife. And they'd be like, no, please take the knife out of me. I can't talk like this. It's not natural. And Rick would say, you drop the knife or I'll put this bullet in your head. And obviously the Whisper would put the knife down, and Rick would hold the Python down to her, and he would say, where's Beta? And she would say, I don't know. He's a few miles east, all right? He's hurting these people. And you'd have Rick, and this would kind of be a bigger reveal in this version rather than just Beta is just elsewhere. You would have a moment where she would say, he's hurting people. He's killing people in that factory. I think they're all dead. I think they're gonna die. And he won't stop. And Rick would just say, people in the factory, sanctuary. He would look back at Judith, and Judith would say, is Dwight and the others dead? And the Whisper would just say, I don't know, but he's gonna keep coming for you. Rick would look pissed after hearing that the sanctuary is under attack, and he would then immediately just say, does he know where we are? And the Whisper would say, I don't know, but your other place, the factory, it's done. And Rick would just shoot her in the head mid-sentence, and he would say, all right, this is done. But then he would look back at Judith, and then he would hear static on the radio. As we see Rick, he picks up his walkie-talkie in a panic. As you hear Morgan breaking up on the other end, and you'd have Rick saying, Morgan, you're breaking up, I can't hear you. And he would be like, oh, we're trapped, Rick, sanctuary. And you would see some of the words are kind of breaking up over the walkie-talkie. And you would have Rick that'd be like, Morgan, do you copy? Morgan. And you'd have Judith and you'd have Rick that look nervous. As we then cut to the outside of the sanctuary, we'd have fires all around. We'd have the walkers surrounding the sanctuary. As we have Beta that stands there in the horde, as he puts his arms out, he says, we walk. As we then see Beta, as he is approaching the front of the sanctuary, and as we see them march in front of it, we see Beta and the horde have them trapped inside. Now afterwards, we would cut inside of the sanctuary as you would see everybody looking panicked. As Dwight would look at everybody, you'd have Morgan, Gabriel, Sherry, and the rest of the saviors that are trapped inside. As he would look at the crowd and he would say, all right, here's the plan. All right, we're gonna open that door. We're gonna make a path. We're gonna clear our way through, okay? We can't be stuck in here too long. All right, last time we were trapped in here, the air ran out and everything went wrong, all right? We are not letting that happen again. And everyone would look scared, and he would basically say, like, all right, look, like, we're gonna do this as a group. And Morgan would look at him and be like, I'm right with you. And Sherry would be like, anything you need. And Dwight would be like, listen, I know you're scared, all right? You haven't seen anything like this in years. I thought we were past this, all right? I really did, and I'm so sorry that I led this to this. And then you'd have Sherry that would say, you have nothing to apologize for, honey. You couldn't have known. And Dwight would look at the group and he would say, all right, everybody that fights, back up against the wall, all right? And you would see everybody and they'd pull out their weapons. Dwight would stand in front of the group as they are ready to make a path. As we see, this is the only option they have left. As we then see Dwight, Morgan, Sherry, Gabriel, and some of the rest of the saviors stand at the door as Dwight says, you ready? As we see him count, 3, 2, 1. He opens the door. We then see Dwight kills a few. We then see Sherry backs him up and shoots a few more. Morgan slices several with his axe, as Gabriel then fires his shotgun and kills a few as well. As we see, they are getting overwhelmed badly. As we then see, Dwight gets tackled to the ground. Sherry then saves him. Morgan starts to get cornered against the wall. Gabriel is out of ammo, as we then have a Whisper that takes Gabriel down. As we see, a Whisper tackles Gabriel to the ground. We then see Morgan trying to save Gabriel, but he can't get to him in time. As they are pinned down, as we see the rest of the Saviors fighting off the Whispers, as we then see they are making their way in. But as the rest of our characters all get pinned and tackled down to the ground, we then see Dwight sees it's over for them. As we then see the Whispers overwhelm our crew as the walkers flood in. Dwight looks outside, and then out of nowhere, we see a massive light shining through the sanctuary doors. As we then hear, "Get down!" As we hear a massive bunch of guns start mowing the walkers down. As we then see Rick, Michonne, Carol, Glenn, and the rest of the Alexandrian fighters have made it to the sanctuary to save their lives. Dwight looks relieved. Morgan sees Rick. As Rick then rides up to this and sees them, he then says to them, "We gotta get out of here, but we don't have much time." We see Dwight and the others get up as the rest of the sanctuary residents all flee out of the sanctuary. As Rick and the rest of them make a path, Rick then says to Carol, "We gotta get the rest of the survivors back at home. We gotta get the rest of the families back to Alexandria." And we have Carol that looks at Rick and she would say, Go. Me, Morgan, Sherry will handle this. The rest, go." And Rick would look at Carol and he would say, No, you can't do this on your own." And Carol would say, "I got this, okay? Go." As we see, Carol is the badass that she is, and she lets Rick and the rest of the survivors go home with the rest of the families to get them to safety. Meanwhile, you have Carol, you have Morgan, and you have Dwight and Sherry that are going to stay back and lead the horde in an opposite direction. As we see the two groups split off, as we see Rick, Michonne, Glenn, and the rest of the Alexandrians take Dwight's people and they flee from the sanctuary. As we then zoom in to the horde, as Beta looks angry, as he sees from a distance, the horde is getting turned around. We then see Carol, Dwight, and Sherry and Morgan on horseback leading a horde away. As we then see, they are leading the walkers away, but then there is a few other walkers that cut them off at the end of the road. As we then see, Morgan takes out his axe and says, "We got him." As we then see Morgan, Dwight, and Sherry go down the road to take these walkers out that are blocking their way. As Carol remains on the horse, but then we see a Whisper comes out of the woods and throws a knife at Carol. Carol ducks, but she falls off her horse. We then see Morgan runs at this Whisper to save Carol, as he then kills this Whisper like they're nothing. Carol then gets overwhelmed by a bunch of the dead, as the dead surround her and tackle her down. As we then see Morgan fights through the dead to save her life, as he kills all these walkers and gives her enough time to get up. Carol gets out of there as she is then saved by Morgan. Morgan looks at her and says, "Hey, are you okay?" And Carol would say, I'm fine, let's just keep moving." As we see Dwight and Sherry, and Dwight says, "You good?" And Carol would say, I'm good." As we see Carol gets back on her horse, they all get back on their horses. As we then see, Sherry says, "The canyon can't be far, we'll dump them from there." Carol then says, "All right, let's just keep moving." As we then see Carol, as she looks out of breath, as we then see a scared look on Carol's face. As we then focus on Carol's neck, as we see Carol has been bit, as she looks at her neck and says, "Shit." So that was The Walking Dead Season 8, Episode 15. Call to Arms. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. This was a massive one. We had the build up to the finale. We introduced Princess. We got to see our survivors doing their thing. They had to flee from the sanctuary. We had a massive horde fight going on. And, well, on top of everything else, it looks like one of our own is going to die by the looks of it. Carol is bit, and we'll have to see what that means leading into this finale. But yeah, you guys have one episode left of this season. A lot of things to see, a lot of things to go down, lots of heavy moments coming up, and a lot of things to experience. So thank you all for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. And of course, stay tuned, guys, because we only got one episode left. Stay tuned, because The Walking Dead Season 8, Episode 16 is coming up next, titled A Certain Doom. Thanks for watching.
Born in the dark alleys, city of concrete. Dan's reviews blowing up, never taste defeat. Walking Dead dissected every plot twist beat. World gone mad, TV junkies hit a treat. Typing up scripts, marathon through the night. His opinions hit harder than a street fight scene. Every episode, brain sharper than a knife. He's the beacon of critique, shedding TV light.